Dear IPA members, partners, and friends, I'm Karim Gay, representing the AAA Initiative Foundation, which serves as the Secretariat for the International Platform on Adaptation Metrics, or IPAM. And I'm pleased to introduce today a new publication by our esteemed IPA member, Dr. Samraj Sahai, called Nature-Based Solutions as Urban Adaptation to Climate Risk, Framework for Economic Evaluation as a Decision Support Tool. Dr. Sahai's work offers a comprehensive five-step framework to overcome NBS integration challenges, providing decision makers with essential methodologies and metrics. Following opening remarks from IPAM Vice Chair Srijita Dasgupta from KABI, Dr. Sahai will present the framework. The discussion will feature Dr. Humphrey Ajavi from the African Research and Impact Network in Kenya, Professor Marco Billy from the Universidad de Chile, and Dr. Paul Forti from the Higher Ground Foundation in the UK. Following the panel, we welcome questions and insights from all participants. A recording of today's session will be made available on our website for those unable to attend or who wish to revisit the discussion. Brigitta, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Karim. I think you have said it very well, but in any case, I think it's an absolute pleasure for me to be opening this webinar on nature-based solutions as urban adaptation to climate risks. I also very much welcome you all on behalf of our chair, Dr. Carl. So this session will dive into a very timely and much needed framework for evaluating the economic effectiveness of NBS, a presentation that will be led by Dr. Samrat Sahay, as Karim mentioned, and further enriched by an outstanding panel of experts who also happen to be very valuable members of IPAM. Just to also briefly give an overview of colleagues and participants who don't know IPAM too well. So we are a global platform established with the aim of advancing metrics for adaptation tracking. It's a very, very rich group of researchers, development practitioners, policymakers, and just people really passionate about work on adaptation metrics, and we cover different themes and subsectors. Collaboration for advancing actions for this cause is a key strength of IPAM, and we aim to work together more cohesively to advance these priorities under the global goal of adaptation in alignment with the different climate and development goals, not just by the UNFCCC, but also different countries. As such, at the moment, a few of us are working together on a technical output around advancing these adaptation metrics and providing real practical solutions or recommendations on how this could be done. And we expect this to be completed towards the end of the year. More information to follow on this as and when we advance. But for now, once again, welcome to this webinar. And unfortunately, I'll have to leave, but I will hand over the floor now to Samraj to take on from here. Thank you.
Let me share first. Okay. So thank you, Karim, and thank you, Srijita, for that introduction. And thank you for this opportunity for presenting my work. So today's presentation is mainly on the framework for economic evaluation as decision support tool for nature-based solution as urban adaptation to climate risk. At the very onset, I would just like to briefly go through the context or the background that why this study was required. You know, the nature-based solution is a relatively new term, although the concept is fairly old. It basically involves working with and enhancing nature to address societal challenges like triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental pollution. NBS, it ensures in achieving the SDGs and also addresses the impacts of climate change as an adaptation strategy or causes through mitigation. And it does so by providing the flow of ecosystem services It can be a very good adaptation for the urban climate risk, mainly related to increased heat, urban flooding, water scarcity, skill security, health risk due to urban air pollution. But despite all this evidence, there has been a very limited, or you can say that a very less integration and implementation of the NBS at different level of urban planning. And the reasons for this includes the lack of evidence on adequate cost effectiveness, long-term efficacy, sustainability, and the difficulties in measuring, or the challenges that one faces in measuring or predicting the effectiveness of the NBS. And these challenges can be attributed mainly to the lack of available evaluation framework for NBS as adaptation. Keeping this in mind, I conducted a systematic literature review to understand the existing state of evaluation framework, and based on the findings, developed a 5-step a holistic risk-based evaluation framework for NBS as urban adaptation. This framework is holistic in a sense that it facilitates evaluation of the effectiveness of the NBS, and at the same time, the evaluation of the economic feasibility of the NBS. Now, this has been published in as a journal article in a journal Sustainable Cities and Societies. And unlike the previous frameworks, which were mostly conceptual, this goes beyond it, and the paper provides the guidance on methodology, on indicators and metrics, and tools and techniques that can be used for each of the step of the framework. So these are the 5 steps of the evaluation framework. Step 1 involves the identification of climate risk. Step 2 is the scoping of the NBS as adaptation. Step 3 is the evaluation of the benefits, of the co-benefits, and the adaptive capacity. Step 4 is the economic evaluation, and step 5 is the final one, which is the informed decision. For a well-informed decision, both the step 3 and step 4 are equally important. Economic evaluation cannot be possible, or it's simply not possible without evaluating the benefits or the effectiveness of the NBS. However, if in case the decision makers are not very keen on economic evaluation, even the step 3 can directly feed into the step 5 for informed decision based on the effectiveness of the NBS. Now I'll just go through the different steps of the framework in a little more elaborate way. The step 1 is the identification of the climate risk. The prominent risk that cities across the globe faces includes the increased heat, mainly the heat waves and the urban heat island effects and the subsequent health effects. Then there are health risks related to air pollution, water pollution, or sanitation. Another prominent risk is of urban flooding, which may be because of the flash floods due to this extreme precipitation, or it may be even the riverine or the fluvial floods. The other risk includes the urban water scarcity and security. This includes the quantity as well as the quality of the water available. Now, the cities differ in terms of the risk that they experience. It's not that all the risks are experienced by all the cities. Some of the cities experience some risk more than the others. Like some may be more prone to urban flooding, while not to the heat waves, and so on. And within the city, the exposure to this risk also is disproportionate. The risk, the exposure to the risk may differ for the different groups. For those living in the informal settlement, particularly in the developing world, or the low income, or those who are elderly or females. So all this needs to be taken into account to identify the risk that are specific to a particular city, for which we are trying to evaluate the adaptation measures. So once the identification of the risk has been done, the next step involves the scoping of the NBS. The cities may have are naturally endowed with features which may serve as a nature-based solution, or they may be planned or implemented like urban parks, open spaces, urban forest, wetlands, or the engineered structures like biospheres, rain gardens, rainwater harvesting systems. So this step basically involves, or it identifies the potential of this NBS to serve as an adaptation to the risks that are specific to a particular city, for which we are trying to evaluate. This is the third step and the most important of all, because this involves determining the reduction in the risk or the enhancement in adaptive capacity. that could be attributed to the NBS, and this involves quantifying the reduction in the UHI effect or maybe the cooling and the subsequent health benefits like reduction in the mortality related to heat or a reduction in hospitalization related to air pollution. It quantifies the reduction in the urban floods, quantify the groundwater recharge potential, and a detailed methodology for all this has been provided in the paper, along with a reference to some of the state-of-the-art literature, which are for each of these fields. Now, another important aspect of this step is to identify and account for the possible trade-offs and disservices, just to avoid the possibility of maladaptation. Now, the ecosystem services that we derive from the nature-based solutions are not independent of each other. They may be interdependent. So there's a possibility of trade-off, and also there's a possibility of disservices or the adverse impact. For example, if you consider an urban forest, or maybe the canopies across the roads, they may provide cooling, but at the same time, they may trap the vehicular pollutants. Okay, they may serve as a source for a pollen allergy. Okay, there are other like wetlands can serve as a habitat for the vector breeding. So these are the disservices that we need to account for to avoid the overestimation of the benefits or the possibility of maladaptation. Now, as a methodological guidance, the paper also provides the risk-wise tools and techniques that can be used for the evaluation of the effectiveness of the NBS, along with the list of indicators and metrics. And these indicators and metrics are not exhaustive. They are just the standard indicators and metrics that are used in the literature that was reviewed for the methodological guidance. And since it's basically used for measuring the effectiveness, they are mostly the output and the outcome type of indicators. I won't go into detail about this. You can have a look at this in the paper. Now, once the benefit or the effectiveness of the NBS as an adaptation has been established, the next step involves the economic evaluation. This economic evaluation, basically, it ensures the economic viability, the long-term effectiveness, and sustainability, and the resource optimization. This is a very vital step. And it basically achieved or it involves the determination of the avoided cost. And this is achieved, for example, the cost of illness approach, where the avoided cost of the health is treated as a health benefit. And the different approaches are mentioned in the paper, such as the direct cost of treatment, the indirect cost, different approaches like stated and revealed preference for willingness to pay. Likewise, the avoided cost of damage due to floodings, the avoided cost of constructing alternative gray infrastructure. So, like we had the methodological guidance on tools and techniques for the effectiveness of the NBS, for the economic evaluation also the paper provides the risk-wise tools and techniques and the indicators and the metrics. Now, since this involves determining the avoided cost or the costing is involved, so some of the enablers and the input indicators are also listed here, in addition to the output and the outcome. Now, this is the final step, which is the making the informed decision. And this is based on the input from step 3 and step 4. And the different tools that are used for making the decision includes the cost-benefit analysis, cost-effective analysis, the MCA or the life cost cycle, and total economic value. Another long-term effectiveness or the economic feasibility depends very much on how the socio-ecological and the socio-economic indicator unfolds in the future under different climate scenario. So it becomes very practical to go for a scenario analysis based on the SSPs and the RCPs. And although if you look at the work, very less work has been done in this field. The common metrics which are used are the standard metrics like net present value or the IRR, the benefit cost ratio, and the payback. Another important thing that we need to take care of in this step 5 is that For the long-term effectiveness of the NBS, it is essential that the flow of ecosystem services continues in a steady state. But this is not the case. It may not be so. The reason being that the NBS itself are impacted by the climate change. So to avoid this, this is not captured normally in the commonly used one-period analysis of the benefits. So it's recommended to avoid it, as it misses out on the dynamic changes and feedbacks in the socio-ecological systems. And hence, bioeconomical models are more recommended here. Now, for coming on to the decision tool, for this framework to serve as an effective decision tool, it is quite essential to ensure that the justice, equity, and inclusivity is included in the decision. So this is achieved by integrating the plural knowledge or the diverse knowledge or the diverse value of the ecosystem services by involving the diverse stakeholders. The different stakeholders may differ in the views or in the perception for a particular adaptation intervention. For example, if you have a open space, usually the planner and the government, the local government would prefer it because it's an excellent intervention for reducing urban flood or groundwater recharging. But for those, especially in the developing countries who are living on the periphery of it in the informal settlements, it may be a cause of concern, because for them it would be a source of regular flooding, or maybe a forced relocation, or even it could have an impact on their livelihoods. So the point here is that every diverse views needs to be included or incorporated into the decision making. And for this, in the decision tool, the step 3, which is the evaluation of the effectiveness, and step 4, the economic feasibility, this is implemented or executed separately for each of the stakeholders, because of the difference in the views. Especially if you talk about the values that the different stakeholders put on the nature-based solutions, they also differ. For example, the citizens who are maybe formal or informal, they may value more on the anthropocentric the aspects of the nature-based solutions, those that are related to the human well-being, whereas the public, the government or the planners, they would be equally important, equal importance to the intrinsic value also. So it's important to take into consideration all the values and all the perceptions. So here, each of the steps is executed differently, separately for each of the stakeholders, and the output from both the step 3 and step 4 then fed into the step 5 for the decision making, thus making the decision just, equitable, and inclusive. Now, the decision tool serves as a monitoring and evaluation tool just because it can be iteratively used and can be applied at any given point of time, and as it considers the current risk colony. And this also eliminates the chances of uncertainty that arises because of the long-term projection of the socioeconomic and the socio-ecological parameters. This also informs the decision on continuing with NBS, identifying the gaps and the fallouts, the possible maladaptations, the corrective measures to address, and the most robust strategies. And the most important part of this tool is that it can be applied across the scales within an urban area and across the cities of developed and developing economies. Now, it's because of these properties of this tool that it can be considered as an ideal candidate to be integrated into the national adaptation plans to capture the adaptation progress at city level and become a part of the vertical integration. It can also cater to the need of the measuring the progress of the different targets and dimensions of the GGA under the UAE FGCR, because NBS is an integral part of all the targets. And similarly, it also aligns with the needs of the other global framework like SDG and biodiversity framework. Most importantly, it contributes to the policy decision on investment. It informs whether it's worth investing in a nature-based solution adaptation or not. It also about the resource mobilization and the funding requirements, and can be used by the urban policymakers, local government, ministries responsible for reporting, city planners, project proponents, private sectors, researchers, and all. So I'll just stop here. And now I just pass on the baton to Marco to continue with the discussion.
Yeah, before
Yes,
I will give
Sanraj.
the floor to
Oh, okay,
Marco, I just want to apologize for Dr. Ajevi. I mean, he's in a field, and he just wrote me that he has some connection problems. He will try to join, but it looks not very promising. Marco, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Karim. And thank you very much, Sanraj, also for your very interesting presentation and the paper that I read with a lot of care and interest. I think I agree with your analysis that there is a need for more integral frameworks of assessment for this kind of work, because it is true that there is usually a fragmentation between discipline. For instance, there are economic evaluation, but usually they do not take into account all the various amount of impacts, risks, and the possible adaptation measures, particularly in nature-based solution. So there definitely is a need to advance into something more integral. And I think in this sense, your proposal is very interesting, also because it explicitly connects with the idea of a decision support tool, which is very necessary for decision maker, funders, local communities, and all the other actors that are involved in that. I think it's also very interesting the way in which um, it is integrated a variety or a um, multidisciplinary variety of tools, of mechanisms, and also of perspectives and values. I think the point you make on that and the need to have an evaluation that considers the different kind of plural perspectives and values is very important. I do have a couple concerns though, which are mostly related with the feasibility of bringing forward these into concrete studies. And for this, it's very interesting that you said that there was a case study ongoing in Delhi. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that. Basically, because when I read the paper and listen to your proposal, the amount of information that tends to be required for all those steps is quite big. And also the steps itself themselves require lots of different evaluation with lots of different expertises, because we need to do interdisciplinary integrative assessment, but we live in a world in which actors tend to have only one limited understanding. So most of the people that actually work in the fields do not have a grasp of all the different techniques and data that you're putting on the stage. So there is a need for integration, which tends to be pretty big. I myself have been leading different kinds of work of integration of data to make integrated assessment, for instance, of adaptation measures of resilience or risk. And that is in itself is very difficult, even without putting in the economic the element, which make it even more complex in some ways. So the question would be, in this way, how would you propose that in concrete example this may be applied, maybe like which kind of capacity need to be built, which kind of teams need to be working for this to happen. Also, another question I had related to that is that I think it's very important, the point you make, that the these assessments in some way, the potential natural-based solution, the way in which they operate, they tend to be very context dependent. And so this is also why you need so much of a complete assessment to understand how this may apply to the specific context, and also why you're emphasizing having these different perspectives, which may also be very context dependent. But at the same time, and also because all of this is, as I said before, like very large, and there is lots of information and probably time required. So my question is there a way you can devise in which these kind of assessments may bring together sufficient information to build some a little bit more like generalizable indicators? Why I'm saying this, because in the end, if the cost of the assessment of nature-based solution is very high, then it becomes non-competitive to do nature-based solution, just because it's very costly to assess whether they are good options. So sometimes we need to find a way for the assessment to be universalizable or scalable so that it can be applied to other cases, even if we know that there is some context dependence, but at the same time, some kind of indicator that may say in which context may something work or be convenient, so that, you know, actual policymaker can do this without having to repeat the assessment every time, which becomes very difficult to do in particularly when you go to smaller cities, so smaller context. So yeah, these are basically my 2 points that would be nice to see in the debate. But again, thank you very much. I think it's a very comprehensive work, and I'm very much looking forward to see how it evolves into concrete applications.
Well, thank you very much, Marco, for your those two very important and relevant questions. Yes, of course, this requires a lot of resources in terms of assessment, because the one person cannot have an expertise for all, and this requires an interdisciplinary team for it, because there are someone who is assessing the water related, someone is for the economic aspects, someone is looking at the heat aspect, urban heat island aspects. But still, if you go look at this, I mean, it's not that it's very, I would say that, if the team works together, it's a sort of a teamwork required with a different expertise. And that is the case with most of the assessment requirement, that we need an entire team of interdisciplinary experts. And that's one thing. And the other one, as you mentioned, that it may, the cost of assessment itself may be too much, or may not be feasible. So I don't think the cost of assessment can be a major hindrance for this, because these are mostly it all depends on the availability of the data. Once you have the data, and especially if you look at most of the risk assessment that has been done, it's the methodologies that have been put forward. They involve the use of satellite images and all the remote sensing data and all. So if the data are available, if data is available, I think the assessment won't be a bit more challenging. So the only thing is that the data is available, that it cannot be, in terms of resources, it's not very resource intensive. It can be achieved. So let's see if the way we do it, the once we implement it, we can get to know more about it, that whether if resources are challenges or not. And so I hope hope I answered those your queries. Okay. Now move on to Paul for your interventions.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Samraj, and also Marco for your contribution just there as well, which I think got that discussion going quite well. Yes, like Marco, I would be interested if you've got perhaps a slide or two to show about any of the case study work you might have already been doing or trying out. That would be quite interesting to see, to add to the discussion here. I like, on the positive side, I very much like the sort of whole system approach that you're trying to outline here, about the involvement of the different dimensions is really, it's great to see. It's exactly the kind of thing we need to be looking at. I'd be slightly more cautious about the data requirements, and the quality issues of the data still seem to me to be quite potentially quite substantial. And I also wonder about it might be possible to do an assessment or an evaluation for a particular city, perhaps. But I'd be interested to know what you think about how or whether it's feasible to do cross-city comparisons if you've got different definitions of data, or different definitions of what is actually an NBS, or even a different definition of what the city is, in terms of whether it includes wider hinterland of city. So that's one thing. But I'd like to pick up a little bit too on the stakeholders dimension as well, because I think that's absolutely crucial. And I know you bring it very much to the foreground, and looking at different levels within the stakeholder groups. So some practical considerations, I wonder, are around about how do you identify and recognize stakeholder groups? And in a sense, how do you know you've got all of the stakeholder groups that are relevant? So there's some practical side of things? I mean, what are the, if you like, the indicators that the tool is actually meeting what it should be doing? In other words, has it got all of the relevant stakeholder groups? How do you define those, etc.? And I'm also wondering a little bit about the time to undertake such a thing, because I know from experience, recognizing and engaging with stakeholders, getting opinions in, analyzing those is actually quite time consuming. And also related to the stakeholder dimension, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be negative, I'm just trying to find out what you think might be good answers to this, is how do you resolve conflicts of interest between different stakeholders? The objectives of one group of stakeholders, like you mentioned, people living in the edge of economically deprived areas of cities wanting to use the space, whereas other people might want to have space to allow to absorb groundwater, etc. How might those conflicts be taken on board? If they're equally valid, how does any final decision get made? I wonder if you've had experience of that, or how you might think that might be approached.
Thanks, Paul, for those very, very valid points that you make here. And as for your first question about the case study, well, the case study, I'm trying to do it for Delhi itself, because Delhi is a city where you got everything perfect recipe for this, because yeah, you have 7 different biodiversity parks, and there's a river running right across the city, and everything is there. And I'm trying it. I'm hopeful that I'll be able to do it in say a couple of months. But that's one thing. And the other one you said about that the conflict, or how do you manage the stakeholders? That's a real challenge, because identifying the stakeholder is another thing, and then bringing them on board is another thing. That's a practical challenge, and that you pointed out, and that's very practical. So the one thing is that if you look at the methodology, and especially for the valuation, that can be done without any conflict of interest. I mean, you can get the valuation of the particular NBS intervention separately, and that's why I mentioned that each of them is being done separately. So the valuation can be done separately for those living in the informal settlement, and those who are into the government or making the decision making. So they can be kept separate, and then the framework, it allows using all those economic values or the economic feasibility, that each one of them that is assessed based on the input from each of these stakeholders, and they are given equal weightage. And this then fed into the step 5 for decision making, for the cost benefit analysis and all those cost effective analysis. So in a way, I think the interest won't overlap. The only issue is how to bring them on board. They can be separated out. I mean, because it's mainly on the effectiveness and valuation, and knowing their perception of each of the stakeholders and the way they evaluate. So that can be done separately from each other. That's one thing. And since equal weightage is given to the values or the perception that each stakeholders have, so that really makes it inclusive, or that really gives a sort of equal importance to all the stakeholders. So that feeds into the decision, and maybe that, I mean, in a way, addresses that challenge of having all the stakeholders on board.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Thank you for that. I mean, it's certainly an interesting area to be delving into, and I think your case study in Delhi is definitely going to highlight
Yes.
quite clearly some of the practical issues you're going to come across in trying to bring those together, and what you do when you have all of those particular analyses ready for the decision makers. And I think the decision level is quite an interesting one as well, as to who actually takes the decision and prioritizes various things. But as you say, with a very good information basis on which to do that is the general aim of what you're trying to do, and trying to having an objective basis is a really important goal, I think, to try to bring to bear on that. At this stage, perhaps, is it sensible to or open up to questions from other parts of the audience as well?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I think it is. It's a good time. And I think we have a question from Rashid Sohel.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. I just introduced myself a little bit. My name is Shohel. I'm from Bangladesh, basically. So I'm one of the adaptation policy cycle expert supporting the GGA of UNFCCC, and also working as an individual consultant for the World Bank as well as for the GIZ and also for the IIED. So that is the quite interesting topics, the nature-based solution. I am also working a little bit on it for designing a project in Bangladesh. And particularly, we have tried also to incorporate the nature-based solution in the project design. But thank you very much. This was a very nice. I don't have that much experience on nature-based solution. I'm trying to learn, and it is helpful. Some question raised my mind, but I'm not sure that it is a good question or not. But anyway, so I didn't read the paper. It would be very helpful if I could receive the paper a little bit earlier. But anyway, I can also communicate with you to get that. But my the first impression is that for the first one is for the implementation. For an example, the climatic event in different areas. You're working on the Delhi. I am thinking about some small municipalities or council where we can implement that. And the climatic event is different from one municipalities or one council to another council. So, and even they have some master plan, or at least they have some development plan. How can we incorporate this NBS if it is not written in their plan? That is the one question. The other question, you have also provided information regarding the economic analysis. So is there anything you have mentioned in your paper that if we do it in the like the typical system or conventional system, and if you can do that in the nature-based solution system, what is the difference between the total cost? So is it reducing the cost for that particular work, or if it is increasing, so why they will take that one? So that is the one thing. And the capacities, if they don't have that capacity to implement this nature-based solution, that is there any suggestion in your paper that what they should like learn from there? And also the data and information, the vital issues you have already tried to mention that they should have that data. So is in your paper, have you already mentioned that for this specific NBS solution, you need these datas, or for that, like if there is any comparative analysis or the information is written over there or not. But yeah, it was my general overview, but yeah, definitely if I could read that one, then I may have very concrete question, but it is general question, I think. Sorry for that.
Okay. Thank you for those questions. Yes, as far as your concern about that, whether it can be applied at a municipality level or at a lower scale, yes, it can be applied. As I mentioned, that it can be applied at any urban scale, whether it's a neighborhood or it's a, say, urban agglomeration or a city or even the peri-urban areas. It can be applied anywhere. And as for the economic evaluation is considered, this economic evaluation is basically done to look at the cost effectiveness of the interventions, whether those NBS as an adaptation is cost effective or not, whether it is worth investing or not. I mean, what's the return on the per dollar investment? So that's the whole idea of the economic evaluation, that whether that's how you convince the decision maker that you can go for this particular NBS intervention, depending on the risk that you face in that particular city. So that's the whole idea of the economic evaluation. And as for that, the suggestion for including in your city plan, I think the paper doesn't provide any. I mean, that was not an objective of the paper to give a direct solution to that how to integrate it. But the thing is that you will be in if you I mean, as I mentioned, that every city, they already are endowed with features which can serve as an NBS. Like there are biodiversity parks, there are urban forests that naturally they are present there, so they can be serving as an adaptation. You need to show that, or you need to come up with the evidence that the city has got this biodiversity park, the city has the natural forest over there. So these forests or these natural forests can be used or can be treated as an urban adaptation. So you can use this framework or the tool to inform the decision maker about this, and what is the benefit of having it, and what is the benefit you get if you enhance it or if you try to implement it at some other place. So that's how it's informative for your decision maker. And if suppose you're planning for something, you want your adaptation plan or the city plan to include it, then providing the decision maker won't agree to including it unless and until you give them a strong reason to do so. So with the existing this thing, the NBS in different cities or within that cities, you can come up with an evidence that, look, this is how, if you invest in the nature-based solution as an adaptation, this is what you get in return for $1 invested. So that really sets up the entire thing when they compel the decision maker to think about it, that why it should not be incorporated or implemented in the city action plan. So that's how I see it.
So thank you very much. I just take another few seconds. So for an example, I tried to do one analysis that for the economic analysis, because in my country, there is a rate schedule fixed by the government. So if you make a one road, just for an example, then this is the rate schedule you need to follow. But whenever we incorporated the climate resilient issue, then we analyze the cost is too high. Then the government said it is not even the government rate schedule or rate schedule. Like there is a building code, and then all these things are written there. So, and we calculate that if we make it climate resilient, then sometimes it is more than 200% more cost need to be, and the government is not approving that. Like this type of things is pop up. So that I am thinking that if there is some solution, which will be like if the cost is more or less same with then we can incorporate it in the plan, and then the government can approve. In that way,
No, there's the economic. I mean, definitely, if you say that this is if you going to include the climate resilience in your infrastructure project, obviously the cost is going to be high. There you have to provide the evidence. The evidence of cost effectiveness. That if this may increase the price of the project, but the overall benefit from that you get in terms of the climate resilience or in terms of the adaptive capacity of the community surrounding areas, then in that case, the benefit the benefit cost ratio, or the benefit is far more than the investment. So even if the project cost goes up, but the overall benefit really it offsets the high cost of the project. So that you have to come up with use this framework or use this analysis for the cost effectiveness analysis, and then show that this is doable or this is worth doing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Paul.
I also just following on from Shoel's discussion there, which I thought was really very good. I wonder whether there's a space in the framework for actually, and not necessarily including them economically, even just listing the disbenefits of doing nothing. In other words, not having a nature-based solution, and whether that also might help strengthen a case over and above any economic dimension as well. I just wonder whether that's something which would be interesting to include or acknowledge perhaps within the framework in some way, just as a sort of, it will cost more to do adapted an adapted scheme, and maybe you can prove it with a cost effectiveness analysis, that doesn't always strike a very good chord with some people to focus too much on economics. I know it's important, but another dimension might be to focus much more on the risks to health, or risks to death, or something like that, of not having a scheme or not following a nature-based solution approach.
I think the final decision making tools that I've mentioned about here is I did mention about the scenario analysis. That becomes that's what I intended there. The scenario means that do nothing is also one scenario, the status quo. As against, the whole concept of economic analysis is to come up with in a way compare the different scenarios, the different interventions, and then come up that which one is most cost effective. So even if you are not concerned about the cost, you can get the effectiveness. I'm not talking about the cost benefit analysis, but the cost effectiveness. A particular intervention, it has to be pitted against do nothing or the status quo. So that's how the gray infrastructure, the green infrastructure, and the status quo. And then we can just compare it. And this is what the economic analysis does. So I hope that some way it's do capture. Yeah, Marco?
No, yeah, just on that, I think I agree with you. I also agree that there is a need, I would say, for two things, maybe. One, to make a clearer case in the narrative, particularly like in the paper, for why is because the point of the economic analysis, as I said before, is the comparison, like to compare options. I think a clearer point may be made in how you present this. So the point is, you need to do things, we need to adapt, but resources are limited. So decision maker need to do something, but they need to choose between the different options. They cannot do everything. So I think that's a good starting point to make the clear case of that. And then yes, it is true that for non-technical people, sometimes more easy understandable cost effectiveness than and cost benefit analysis, for instance, because you are starting with a basis like this is what I have, and what I can do with this in some way. But that depends. That probably depends in many ways on who your audience is. So you have a decision support too, but the decision support is for which kind of decision maker with which kind of capacities. How is this information going to be presented to them? This is also very important because, again, it's a very big thing with lots of information, and some people will need all of that. But like, for instance, in my personal experience, most decision maker usually want something that says green, do it; yellow, think about it; yeah, red, not do it. Whatever more than that is above whatever they will consider. So it's like the point is you want to make the analysis, but then you want to translate it to something which is as simple as possible, even if that means a black box. So maybe um, I would say that there is probably a balance that can be had on that. But on the other hand, to make it more complex, I think there is also a point that was done before this, that while the economic analysis can make that, it always won't consider all kinds of benefits or cost of like negative benefits, like because there are like many things that even with contingent analysis, etc., they cannot quantifiable in many ways. So in some way, you could also stress that like this is a minimum, like it could actually probably more, but it gets you a bare minimum of what the benefit may be for a different kind of dimensions. But it's probably more than that in the way, because there are some things that cannot be quantified. Like human life can be quantified in economic terms, but it's usually considered a under assessment of what it actually values, no, in some way. So I would say like maybe you could put that point on, and maybe some, when you're doing the application, that you're going to do like concretely, like I would say, like reflect a lot on how you translate all of these in concrete ways for people to use. That
Yeah, you make a very valid point, and I did mention in the presentation, the first itself, that the step 4, which is economic evaluation, can easily be dropped off, and the step 3, which is the analysis of the effectiveness of the NBS as an adaptation, can directly feed into the decision making. So that's specifically for those where the decision makers are not very much interested in the economic aspects, because you rightly said that not all are interested in it, but especially if you go to the government sector, and the decision makers, the policy makers, they are concerned about the budget. So that there, this serves as a very effective tool. But if the decision makers are not, they can be other decision maker also, they can easily just drop this economic evaluation. And the paper does provide the methodology for measuring the effectiveness of the NBS as an adaptation. Like if you have an NBS option, what is the reduction in the mortality due to reduction in heat? Things of that sort. So those directly feed into the decision making, that, oh, if you have this NBS solution in a particular area, which is a kind of high risk of heat related mortality, so this is the reduction in the heat. No need to go for any economic analysis, that what is the monetary benefit or anything of that sort. You can just cut short the evaluation framework there itself, and then that can make a useful sort of contribution to the decision making. And I also mentioned about this the disk services. The paper also mentioned about, it has got references to the state of the art. The papers or a methodological, which has a methodology of taking into account this disk benefits. The disk services that this NBS may provide. As I mentioned, give you the example of trapping of the pollutants, or the it's a habitat for the vector breeding ground. So these are some of the, they have to be subtracted. Otherwise, the benefit, there will be overestimation of the benefit. So I hope, is there any other question?
I think we are reaching the top of the hour, and I'm thankful for these very lively discussions. As you know, the recording will be uploaded to the website of the IPAM, and see you on next episode. Thank you, everybody.